Welcome to this lesson titled Introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. It is part of the series called The Sermon on the Mount. My name is Christopher.
And my name is Anastasia. We will be your narrators for this lesson. You may wonder, what does the Sermon on the Mount teach us? How does it apply in our life? In this lesson, we will get an overview of the Sermon on the Mount. First, we will look at the background and setting where this took place. Then we will see the main topics covered during this sermon. This starts with the Beatitudes, then how they developed, how we can maintain and protect them in our life, and finally, we will hear a hymn that teaches us the Beatitudes. Let's start with the first topic, background. We see here an icon of Jesus preaching to the multitudes. He preaches the Sermon on the Mount. We find an account of this event in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, chapters 5 to 7. During the sermon, Jesus covered different topics. He started by presenting the Beatitudes. These are 9 inner attitudes or precepts that we should adopt to reach God's kingdom. Then he described how they developed from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Next, he presented ways of maintaining them in our life through spiritual disciplines such as prayer and fasting. And Jesus ended with ways we can protect the Beatitudes from false prophets and other threats.
Let's see how the Bible introduces the Sermon on the Mount. The reading in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 1 starts as follows. And seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Then he started presenting the Beatitudes. We can examine this text more closely. Multitudes. In the Old Testament, only a select few were chosen to hear God directly. Here, God incarnate speaks to the multitudes face to face. Mountain. The mountain is a place where divine action enters human history, the place where God reveals himself to man.
Seated. Seated is the traditional Jewish position for teaching with authority. Some early Christian preachers, for example, St. John Chrysostom, sat while the people stood. We can now discover the content of the sermon itself. It starts with the Beatitudes.
In the Beatitudes, the Lord shows us the spiritual inner attitudes needed to reach the kingdom of God. According to the Orthodox Study Bible, beatitude is defined as follows, literally, exalted happiness or blessing. The ninefold blessing of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount is called the Beatitudes. The first beatitude is, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Generally, the Beatitudes share this structure. First, we consider the doctrine or precept such as, Blessed are the poor in spirit. Secondly, we see the blessing or promise of reward such as, For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Beatitudes are the ninefold blessing of Christ. They cover these precepts. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, the righteous, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, the persecuted, and the reviled. In the Beatitudes, the Lord highlights the spiritual attitudes needed to reach the kingdom of God. They are both the outcomes and markers of an authentic life, which gives us a foretaste here on earth of the blessedness of the age to come.
The next topic covered in the Sermon on the Mount is how the Beatitudes were developed. Jesus teaches us how the Beatitudes were developed over time, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. In the Bible, we have the Old Testament that we abbreviate as OT, and the New Testament that we abbreviate as NT. In the Old Testament, we have the laws that God gave to Moses, and we have the prophets such as Elijah and Isaiah. The laws and the prophets is an expression describing the entirety of the Jewish scriptures, which was the full extent of the Bible existing at that time. In the New Testament, we have the teachings of Jesus, who came to fulfill the laws and the prophets. This is depicted in the second icon of the Transfiguration of Christ. On the right, we have Moses holding in his hands the laws or commandments that God gave him. On the left side, we have the prophet Elijah representing the prophets and their prophecies. In the center, we have Christ, who came to fulfill the laws and the prophets. As Jesus says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." For example, Jesus reminds us of the sixth commandment from the Old Testament. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of the old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment." We see a parallel between thoughts and actions. Jesus forbids sinful anger, identifying it with murder. We see a development of ideas. We go from forbidden actions in the Old Testament, such as the sixth commandment, "You shall not murder," to forbidden thoughts in the New Testament, such as Jesus forbidding sinful anger. And then we go to desirable thoughts or attitudes in the New Testament, such as the Beatitude, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." We go from the forbidden to the desirable, from outward actions to inner thoughts or attitudes.
The next topics covered in the Sermon on the Mount are how to maintain and protect the Beatitudes in our life. Jesus teaches us how to maintain the good inner attitudes. This is accomplished through spiritual disciplines. These include prayer. Jesus teaches us the Lord's Prayer. Jesus also teaches us about fasting and how to do so with humility. Jesus teaches us other spiritual disciplines that we will cover later in the series. Jesus teaches us how to protect our Beatitudes from harm. Jesus says, "Narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." In other words, the way to God's kingdom is a difficult one. Jesus warns us about false prophets that may deceive us. He speaks of wolves in sheep's clothing. And Jesus tells us, "Whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock." We build our spiritual house on the solid foundation of Christ's teachings and not on unstable elements likened to sand. These were highlights of the Sermon on the Mount. Next is a beautiful hymn that teaches us the Beatitudes. Let's listen to it.
In thy kingdom remember us, O Lord, when thou comest into thy kingdom. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are they that make peace, for they shall be be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice, rejoice, and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven.
Thank you for participating in this lesson.
Thank you.